listening to the Hunter Conservationist podcast.
There's a lot of topics globally when you involve hunting that seem to be very controversial. I think probably top of the list is this notion of trophy hunting. I think everybody around the world has different definitions of it, and you get people or organizations that have defined it differently that try to get into conversations with each other, and it doesn't go so well. It's just it is a very controversial topic for sure. I think second down from that, unless you guys think there's something above that, I think has to revolve around the hunting of predators, carnivores, especially the large carnivores. And when that is part and parcel of what we would refer to in wildlife management as predator management, there is objectives tied around the hunting. It's not the hunting of a whatever animal for the sake of the animal, but it's being done with management objectives. So yeah, I think that's a controversial topic. That's going to be what we're going to be talking to Dr. Moore about in this show today, but we're doing what we normally do is we come at it from the science side. So, there's been some research done on it out of Minnesota. And so let's, we're going to dive into that. I think, if I'm going to generalize, which is, a bad thing to do as a critical thinker, that, I think in general, hunters think that predator management is part and parcel of all hunting. If we want to be harvesting ungulates, then we need to be balancing that with the up and down cycles of, the predators that want some of it too. I think that goes down rabbit holes where, people don't like any predators all, but I think the middle portion of hunters are yes, no predators, we love them too, whatever. We just kind of want a balance so that, we can get our venison in the freezer for the winter. I think all across North America, you're going to have a varied perspective from Indigenous people on the role of predators, predator management, and their sustenance. Game animals, we've dove into that a lot here in Canada. And then you have folks that completely disagree with this idea of killing one animal to save or promote another, especially when the other animal is being quote unquote saved so that hunters can shoot it in the fall, right? And I get that, if I'm looking at that from the outside, I'm like, that's pretty bizarre. Like, I really need to understand where your folks are coming from. So, we've kind of got these two schools of thought. So we're going to dive into this topic and hopefully through understanding Dr. Moore's research, maybe step back and look at the bigger pictures of why do you need to do this? Why do you need to hunt these predators for a game animal? And then the other question is, does hunting work? Is it actually accomplishing what people think that it's accomplishing? So the conversation is going to revolve around black bears and moose in Minnesota, close neighbors. So this is going to be exciting. Hey, everybody, it's Mark Hall, your host.
And it's Curtis Hall, your co-host. The Hunter Conservationist podcast is brought to you by J. Martin Taxidermy. To capture your most cherished hunting memories, trust J. Martin Taxidermy, an exceptional family-owned business in West Kelowna, British Columbia. Founded by Jesse Martin, who grew up immersed in the Okanagan's rich hunting culture, Jesse blends passion with precision. He trained at the renowned Penn School of Taxidermy, and J. Martin Taxidermy infuses every mount with artistry and dedication. They operate a state-of-the-art facility, serving clients locally and worldwide. From securing wildlife permits to seamless shipping, J. Martin Taxidermy handles every detail with unmatched care, ensuring your memories are preserved flawlessly. Visit jmartintaxidermy.com, check them out. And as always, big shout out, big thanks to Jesse for his continual support of what we do here on the show.
And I'm sure, and he's probably done this, if you are a hunter and you like that predator-prey dynamic, you can probably have a giant mount for your den of a predator and a prey animal interacting and replicating what goes on out there in in nature. One of the things we like to do, Seth, sometimes after this is I like to have these little facts about taxidermy, like uh, the origins of it go back to like the Egyptians, and we've covered, they used to use arsenic. We've covered different things here and there about taxidermy. So here's one for folks. Where do you think the world's largest taxidermy collection is in the United States? Do you think it's a Hunter? No, it's the Smithsonian Natural Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. If you are one of our American followers, and you obviously know and have probably read uh, works by Teddy Roosevelt. I read last winter his great, big, huge, it's a massive read, African game trails. So a lot of that safari was bringing animals back to the Smithsonian, and they're still there today. So that's great taxidermy work.
I have to interrupt. My first job ever was actually volunteering at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum.
No way!
I
Wow.
helped I helped to teach a class where we stuffed small mammals as specimens for the museum. And so I don't have much taxidermy experience, but I have stuffed small mammals, and I worked at the Smithsonian as a 13-year-old kid.
Oh, so cool. So cool. I mean, that's a great thing. Our family, Curtis's Boppa, my father-in-law, was a taxidermist for 50 some years, and Curtis worked there after school, doing all the stuff like that as well. So there you go. You're coming right from the largest taxidermy collection in the world. You have firsthand experience of that little fun fact. Dr. Seth Moore, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a pleasure.
You bet.
So, you are the director of biology and environment at Grand Portage Band of Chippewa in Minnesota. That's correct?
That's correct. I think my title
Wow.
now is Director of Natural Resources. I gave the environmental department to another staff member, but
Okay.
it's certainly close enough. Yes.
Nice, nice. And looking at your bio, I'm like, I gotta read this because like you've got quite the legacy of accomplishments here. So 2018, you received the Conservation Award from the North American Fur Association. 2013, you were the Tribal Biologist of the Year from the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. You were the co-recipient of Time Magazine's 2006 Person of the Year. That is the coolest thing. I'm like, I got to go look back on like the cover of Time Magazine and find you. And then you were appointed to a 4-year term on the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources by the governor of the state. And if I read this right, this December is the end of your 4-year appointment.
Yeah, and I could potentially get renewed for another 4 years. We'll see.
Okay, fantastic. And you do all wildlife stuff and research and teaching and everything. And uh, the when we first connected, I actually saw a paper that you published. I was about exactly this time last year, called "Spring Black Bear Harvest and Predation Pressure on Moose Calves in a Multi-Predator System." And that's what caught my attention. I read it, and I just love the fact that there's been a little bit more science on predation, specifically here, black bears on moose calves, and really like looking forward to learning about it. I thought maybe we could kick off by, can you fill us in a little bit on like the state of science on predator management, like around North America? Like, is there a lot? Is it all kind of finding the same thing? Is it all over the board? Like, what's the state of science?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think you sort of touched on it, that it's all over the board. I think wildlife managers like me have competing objectives sometimes. And sometimes the societal interests are to protect predators at all costs. And sometimes the societal interests are to increase the populations of harvestable species like moose or elk or deer. Um, and so you have to balance these things. And biologists have tried a number of different approaches, um, hands-off approaches, not managing predators at all, managing one species of predator but not another, managing multiple species of predator. And the results across North America vary as well. Some biologists have found that some level of predator management is not effective at all. It does nothing to increase populations. If people have found that if they manage one predator species, that perhaps another predator species compensates for the predation on that prey animal, and the prey animal doesn't improve its population whatsoever. So it literally is all over the board. But in our instance, we have had a declining moose population since 1990, and declining at a relatively significant and steady rate. I think our population had dropped by about 70% from 1990 to about 2020. And so we wanted to understand why the population had declined, first of all. So we started a moose collaring program in 2010, and were able to track what caused mortality in adult moose. And then starting in 2013, we began collaring neonate moose calves and trying to understand what was causing mortality in calves as well. And what we found was adult mortality was not driven by predation whatsoever. They were dying of two parasites. One is winter ticks, which is a natural parasite to moose, but as our climate gets warmer, winter tick populations survive better. They drop off in early spring, and when ticks drop off and hit bare ground, they survive better and their populations explode. Whereas when winter ticks drop off in early spring and there's deep snow, that actually mitigates their population and their populations don't explode. So with more winters with bare ground, we're seeing much higher tick damage. And then in our region, our deer densities were higher than historically. Deer carry another parasite that affects adult moose, which is called brainworm. Deer are not affected by brainworm whatsoever, but it causes neurological damage to moose and is ultimately lethal. So those two parasites were really what was driving the adult moose population. But in our annual surveys, we were seeing really low numbers of moose calves surviving their first year of life, even though in our collaring work, we knew that pregnancy rates were 90% or above for cows that should be pregnant. So we had high pregnancy rates, low survival rates of calves. We began collaring the calves and tracking them literally from the day of birth until they died. The collar would send us a mortality signal. And it was very clear to us quickly that about 80% of moose calves are dead within 2 weeks of life. And
Jeez.
that was driven nearly completely by predation. And predation rates and predator types vary by region, but in our region, the predation was driven almost equally by black bears and wolves. And so we studied this for about 3 years and realized these predation rates were equal by black bears and wolves. But in the US, wolves are protected under the Endangered Species Act. So we didn't even have an opportunity to manage wolves as a predator because of the Endangered Species Act. But black bears we could. And historically, we've had a fall bear hunt. But in 2016, we implemented a spring bear hunt starting right after the bears left hibernation and and lasting through that month of calving that where moose give birth, which is essentially about May 5 to June 15, give or take.
Okay.
And so we started this spring bear hunt for 3 years, and immediately it was effective. Not by high numbers of bears being harvested. We were only harvesting a handful of bears during the spring, but what we found was that the bait stations that were being used by bears that the hunters put out was actually drawing the bears off of moose calves because the calories are free. They don't have an angry moose to contend with, So we had some level of increased harvest, about 15% more harvest per year because of the spring bear hunt. But the diversionary feeding was very, very effective, and is arguably a very, very good management tool if one doesn't want to harvest a high number of bears, but wants to protect calves from high predation rates.
Wow. Wow. It seems to me, I read a research project a couple years ago. I'm just trying to remember if it was in northern Minnesota. Maybe this will ring a bell for you, where researchers actually found the same thing, like bait stations that were put up were drawing bears away from residential areas, and it was nothing to do with hunting. It was just trying to mitigate human bear conflict, and it was successful in keeping bears away from like the interface areas, of residents. So that was
I'm familiar with the research. I'm not sure where it
okay.
was in the U.S. I'm not positive it was in Minnesota, but in doing
Might have
this
been
research,
Wisconsin, but
yeah,
yeah.
in doing this research, we had to we had to research what other approaches were being used and were being published. And we did see a few studies where wildlife managers attempted diversionary feeding during very specific timeframes to protect young ungulates from predation, and it was effective.
Wow. I mean, the part I find super interesting is like it's like you said, it's not like a really intense rate of harvest, because other things we've seen, like with wolf populations and coyotes, like if you want to see a response in an ungulate population, you're like 80-90% removal of the population year after year. And then you'll see responses in an ungulate population. But you weren't probably
Nowhere
that
near that.
that close. Wow.
Nowhere near that. One of my colleagues has done some interesting work in Algonquin Park, and he found that black bear predation on moose calves was really based on individual bears targeting calves, as opposed to sort of the bear population broadly preying on moose calves. And so I thought that was a really interesting study, and it's something to think about, where if we have this region where our moose calves are dropped in a pretty focused area, we may get bears that have a search image or a target specifically for calves. And so it might just be limited levels of harvest on bears to be really, really effective.
So are you kind of like thinking like black bears at being specialists? Like I've heard that in, especially
Yes,
the cats, you'll have cougars that become specialists for,
precisely.
like mule deer, and they'll completely ignore like a mountain sheep or whatever and walk past the herd. Like just,
Yep,
so, so
that's
that's,
exactly it. And
wow.
certain wolf packs will target certain types of prey as well. There are some wolf packs, they tend to be smaller, that target beavers more intensely than some of the larger ungulates. And then, like in our area, we have moose packs that are specifically in moose range, definitely target moose as well.
So, well, did you see an increase in wolf predation on the calves by removing bears? And if you didn't, like maybe explain what you think was going on there, because
We didn't. And
intuitively, you remove a big bear out of an area, and it's like, yeah, you're not one bear's not saving one calf, because like tomorrow 6 wolves are gonna like come rolling through this
yeah,
area.
it's a great point. We did not see what's called compensatory predation by wolves. Wolf predation rates did not increase at all during the course of our study. And so, what that's called in biological terms is additive mortality. There was a rate of 35% of moose calves that were being harvested by wolves. There were 35% of moose calves that were being preyed on by black bears. And those two rates in our area happened to be additive. So, when we removed one of those predation rates, the bear one literally dropped to zero. During the course of our study, we saw a 40% increase in calf survival um, by doing that. So it worked well for us. It doesn't mean it will work anywhere else in this world. And it may not even work again, down the road. It's just during the time frame that we did this, it was an effective approach. Why does that happen? It's hard to say. It could be that there are a sufficient number of calves on the landscape to meet the consumption needs of the current wolf population, and there were sufficient number to meet the needs of the bear population. And by removing those bears that were targeting calves, it allowed for us to have a release on calf survival.
Because certainly wolves aren't scared of black bears. Like, at least in my experience, I know in the far north, it's actually the other way around. There's a reason black bears learn to climb trees in the boreal system, and it's actually to keep away from the wolves. They're naturally scared of dogs, which is why the baying of hounds is effective to get them to tree. So yeah, that is super interesting. Like, because obviously the wolves and the bears were in the same habitat. There wasn't an avoidance thing. um did you find that anything like sex age with the black bears, that like, was it the big old males, was it sows with cubs, like,
That's a really good question, and it's not an easy question for us to answer, because when we encountered a dead calf, we didn't know
yeah,
which bear ate it. We do know that our hunters targeted single, generally male bears, because they have an opposition to hunting sows with cubs. We're glad
yep,
for that, because dealing with
yeah,
orphan cubs is a pain in the butt from a biologist perspective.
yeah. I think that's universal in North
Yeah,
America. It's
yeah,
against the law to harvest a female with with cubs.
gotcha.
um
I was a
yeah,
huge
that
fan. I really liked this program. Our bear hunters were effective. They were very, very respectful of the fact that they were being allowed to hunt on tribal land. And to be completely honest, they were doing a job for us. They were essentially working on our behalf, by harvesting a few bears and dropping, literally thousands of pounds of bait on the landscape. They helped us out. So I think it was a great project, and I really enjoyed working with those guys. The other thing that's interesting
that's
about the
awesome.
hunters, yeah, sorry. The other thing that's interesting about the hunters themselves is they have a deep passion for bears, and were just as interested in, running culvert traps with us to collar the bears as they were in harvesting them. There was no particular bloodlust to harvest these bears. They just like bears. So I
Yeah.
enjoyed that, and appreciated their appreciation for bears as well.
Yeah, and I think you find that in the hunting community, if they're houndsmen that like to hunt cats, they're the ones that are there helping to research, collar, the hunt. They're the first ones to come stand up at a public meeting and say, I think we have some issues in such and such a management zone. This is what we're seeing, on the ground. Just like very, very rounded people. Your study, didn't you kind of have the luxury of collared animals, and then like COVID, and like, so that you had like this period where it was almost like a reaffirm that yes, hunting is
Yes.
the factor that's working here. Maybe explain what
Yeah,
happened.
you bet. This was intended to be a 6-year study with 3 years pre-treatment, 3 years where we did not have a spring bear hunt, and 3 years post-treatment where we had the spring bear hunt. And a few things happened. First of all, our our statistics weren't strong enough for the article to get published after 6 years, and so it got rejected from a journal. But the fortunate thing, and that happens in science regularly, the fortunate thing that happened from that was we were able to continue doing this type of research for another 5 years that included the pandemic. So during the pandemic, we did not have a spring bear hunt. We didn't want any visitors coming to the reservation. Indigenous people had a higher level of susceptibility to COVID, and a higher mortality rate associated with that. So we closed the spring bear season, and then we didn't reopen it for a year or so. Then we reopened it for a period of time. Then we closed it again. So we had this sort of on and off spring bear hunt where we could measure its impact over a full study length of 11 years, and our results were even more compelling after 11 years. So I'm fully convinced that approach works at this point in time, and our study obviously got published. So our peers that were scientific reviewers on our paper felt that it was compelling enough as well.
Wow. Now, your research, like on tribal lands, like that must be of value outside tribal lands for the state as well. Like, are they picking this up? Are you working like closely with them? Because animals don't respect like the boundaries, like they'll move,
Right.
off tribal lands. And so what kind of cooperation or data
Yeah,
sharing
that's
have you?
that's a, that's a it's a great point, and that's exactly how I view the wildlife research that we do here on the reservation. Is we have a smallish land base at 70 square miles. It's big enough to have the full range of ecological interactions, but it's small enough that it can be managed at a reasonable scale. And so I look at the work that we are going to do here, the research work, as pilot work that, if it's effective, could be expanded more broadly. So it allows us to do innovative things. The other thing that's really fortunate about working for a tribe is we have complete natural resources jurisdiction over our land base. We don't have to get permits from anybody other than from ourselves. And we have very low levels of hierarchy within our tribal governance, right? So we have elected officials. We have an administrator that supervises my position, and I am the third in line from a natural resources management perspective. So there's not a long chain of permissions to be able to do things. So we're very nimble. I think that I should have just said that more succinctly. But anyway, we're very, very nimble, and we can do management activities with a minimal amount of time and administrative hurdles.
Yeah, no, that's a great model to have in every aspect of society. Like just straight, like this is the person that knows, can talk to the person that can decide, and just cut out all those people in the middle. That would benefit a lot of areas of society.
One thing I think about
Super cool.
Yeah, one thing I think about related to that is, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources has a staff of 3,000, okay, for the state of Minnesota. Um, our tribe has a land area with management jurisdiction of nearly a similar size with our ceded territory. We have a staff of 30, right? 30 as compared to 3,000. And so it's a lot of work per individual, but we can be very, very nimble because we don't have the levels of hierarchy and the sheer volume of people to work with.
Yeah, yeah. I just, yeah, like first of all, 3,000 people in Minnesota, and you look at the province of British Columbia where Curtis and I live, and it's like our province is as large as the Western United States from Seattle to the Mexican border, and we probably have like 30 people
I
that work
agree.
for the government
It's
manage
it's
wildlife.
a
So,
it's a fantastic point. I absolutely agree
well,
with you. Yeah.
yeah, that's amazing. So, on a little fill us in a little bit the best you can in the cultural context on the tribal lands, moose to the people. Like historically now, was it the animal that the culture revolves around? Like we have like the salmon
Right.
people, there's the bison, like you move around North America, culture identifies typically with a game animal. So
Yeah, I'll
it,
I'll do my best to address that. So, in Grand Portage, since I have been here, and for most of recent history, going back at least a couple hundred years, moose are the primary terrestrial subsistence species. It's a northern boreal forest ecosystem. Um, and so for most of relatively modern history, moose have been the primary subsistence species. Prior to that, were actually caribou. Um, so our region had healthy caribou populations, and after both logging and white settlement, um, the caribou were extirpated as a consequence of both the hunting and the logging practices, and it actually improved the habitat for moose, which which were present but maybe not in as high levels. So after caribou were gone, moose were the only large prey species available to the Grand Portage Band, and have been that way since. In more recent years, as a consequence of a warming climate, and land use practices, deer numbers have increased dramatically. So deer have become more of a dominant subsistence species for the tribe, for a couple of reasons. They're more numerous. They're far easier for a hunter to handle. When you're in the woods and you're dealing with a moose, it's a lot of work, and oftentimes it's a team effort. It takes a couple of people to process a moose, unless you're really good. And so more recently, deer are transitioning to being a really dominant prey species, and so societally speaking, we've seen some shifts as well. I mean, we have a constituency of hunters that prefer to see moose over deer, but we also have a constituency of hunters that like having deer be more numerous and easier to deal with, and are not as strongly focused on restoring moose. And like any population, there are a gamut of opinions. The
Yeah.
same can honestly be said for bears and wolves. There are indigenous people that feel that wolves should be protected at all costs. They're a brother to the indigenous people. Culturally, there are people that feel that way about black bears as well. And at least in the Ojibwa culture, which is the culture where I work, there's a bear clan. And at least modern day bear clan people are very, very protective of bears and feel that they shouldn't be harvested. So from a societal perspective, there were some pushback after about 6 or 7 years of doing a spring bear hunt, where some people felt that we should not be harvesting bears during the spring, and we were asked to stop for a period of years. Um, and so that's also part of this study that's on and off again. Spring bear hunt was also influenced by societal factors as well, and changing opinions on whether or not we should be harvesting bears in Grand Portage.
Wow. So complex. The animal biology ecology side of it, sometimes just the simpler piece, put a collar on it. Yep, this is what it did. Now, outside of the indigenous culture there in Minnesota, it is and was the heritage of hunting built on the moose. Like, it seems like it is in the neighboring,
In
jurisdictions
this in
from.
this northeastern part of Minnesota, absolutely it was.
Okay, okay.
I mean, it was really the prey species, or the the harvestable species.
Families and, like, the
Exactly.
little
And
cabins
and
out
if
in
you
the
look at
in the
the
woods
nearest
and yeah.
the nearest town to where I live is Grand Marais. I mean, moose is an icon. They are on every logo of every store. Every souvenir shop is focused on moose and antlers, and it still is absolutely an icon of northeastern Minnesota. And part of the reason we have such a strong tourist economy is for people to view, moose as a wildlife species. It's definitely been tougher as moose populations have declined, but we haven't lost that sort of identity of moose as being part of northeastern Minnesota culture.
Okay, okay. That's cool. Probably got a hockey team up there that are
The moose.
probably got the moose logo on it, I bet. So, now, the same dynamic that you talked about, like the societal factors, like within the tribes, was it that's echoed outside, like in the non-indigenous community as well. Like, how did you approach this? Or, like, this is kind of the, like what you said, the philosophical part about being a PhD in wildlife, is how do you reconcile this with those folks, whether they're indigenous or non-indigenous, these views about, like, hey, we need to hunt these black bears because the science is showing that it increases, moose calf survival, and people like to hunt and have moose meat in the wintertime. Like, how did some of those conversations work for you, and what's the value proposition here?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. It's something I think about regularly and have thought countless hours about, because most wildlife biologists really prefer to not be interventionist in wildlife management. Our preference is to let ecology and nature sort itself out. But there are times when, if there is a desired societal outcome, like an increasing moose population that's been dropping for the last 30 years, we may have to do some interventionist type of work, like managing predator species at some level. And the way I think about it is exactly that, is this is a tool to help us achieve a goal. It doesn't have to be a permanent tool. It's a tool to achieve a desired outcome. So it could be that we do some predator management for a few years. We get a good, strong bolus of calves that survive through their first year of life. We increase the moose population to a point where there are now more calves being born every year that can meet the needs of the predators that are on the landscape and still produce a growing or at least a stable moose population. So I see these as short-term tools to accomplish a specific objective, and that's how I think about it. That's how I try to communicate it as well. The other
Yeah.
philosophical thing that I think about is, human beings do not have a good history of environmental stewardship in recent history. Indigenous people have a great history of environmental stewardship, but post settlement, and partly because of, honestly, because of religious teachings that have taught that the world was placed here for the purpose of humans to use and have dominion over, I think that has caused some very serious environmental degradation because humans feel entitled to do what they want with the environment. My thinking is, when we have caused enough damage that the ecosystem no longer functions in a viable manner, then we have an obligation, a moral obligation, to do something about that, to fix the problems that we have. So if our deer population is so high that moose cannot be sustained at adult levels because of brainworm, then we have an obligation to manage deer densities at a slightly lower level to provide a release on mortality from brainworm. I have the similar argument. If wolf populations in this region are driven by high deer densities, even though deer are a primary prey species of the wolf, when calves are dropped, that predation rate on calves is extremely high because they're the easiest thing to eat. Then again, we may have a moral obligation to try to manage wolf populations slightly lower, to allow for a release on calves. The same goes for the black bears as well. So I see these things that we're managing are direct consequences of bad decisions that we as humans have made that have altered the landscape so that it no longer functions the way that it should. And so, because we've made this mess, I feel that we have an obligation to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that one's still even a hard conversation to have with somebody that isn't a hunter, right? They'd be like, "Well, stop logging, stop wrecking the habitat, stop like messing the things up that you're then trying to fix by killing one animal to save another."
Yeah.
But it's not always that simple, because it's not
No,
just
I
logging.
mean, and
It's your
there's a
highway, it's your power plant,
everything.
it's your
Shoes.
golf course, it's your, like everything. And
Yeah, nobody takes a perfectly high road. That's the reality of it, right? Anybody who's using a cell phone is supporting mining. Anybody that drives a vehicle or rides in a vehicle or has ever ridden in a vehicle is supporting mining, right? So you have to find this line between not being hypocritical, right, and trying to do the right thing. And I mean, even the logging argument, if you have a house that's made of wood, you are pro-logging in some capacity. My other argument is the people that are opposed to two people that are opposed to logging is old growth forest in large tracts is not a natural state of the environment. It's almost like a mausoleum of the absence of any natural force or human force. And so old growth forest is actually relatively rare in the environment because, in the absence of logging, there was huge broad scale wildfire that swept through areas and did the same exact thing as logging, which was create new forest.
yeah.
So sometimes these knee jerk reactions by everybody, the pro hunting community, the anti hunting community, pro-logging, the anti-logging, most of them are wrong in some way. And I think you have to think about this in a more nuanced fashion with a little bit deeper thinking and not knee-jerk reactions and not knee-jerk thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's great points. It's an incredibly complicated part of wildlife management. So here's a complicated part of wildlife management for you. Now, you're using bear hunters as this tool for moose management objectives. Do you have some tribal members that are participating in the spring black bear hunt as well as part of it? Okay, so now as the
Wait, I'm sorry,
wildlife
I didn't
manager,
get a chance to answer. So I was, nodding because this is a good question, but we actually
okay,
we do not have any tribal member harvest of black bears. Um,
really, okay,
yeah,
okay,
it's
super
fascinating, and
interesting.
so partly it's because a lot of the people nowadays are members of the Bear Clan, and
Yeah, yeah.
partly I think that people would rather eat moose or deer, to be honest, and I have to say I don't blame them.
Oh, geez. Yeah, I love black bear. And so where I was going with this is like, okay, you know, um, calf recruitment is really high. It's the predation that it is feeding isn't hurting the moose population. Moose are doing what we want them to do. They're stable. They're increasing whatever. So we don't need this management tool. But then your bear hunters are be like, hey, like we're glad to help out, but we're passionate about bear hunting and we do like our bear meat that's been in the slow cooker for 20 hours and it's just absolutely amazing on a bun or whatever. It's like you got to come over and try it there, Seth. So like there's the part of, and this I think this is a bigger conversation as well. There's the part of hunting where hunting is a tool to accomplish objectives, but then it's also goes the reverse. We're managing wildlife so that there can be hunting. And in this case, I would be like, and I get it, it's tribal lands. Like if they just said, no, thanks for your participation,
Yeah.
we're good for a
No,
while, like it's the
it's
end
a
of
good
it. But,
point. Yeah, it's a
but
really good point, and something I think about this as well is we're essentially using them as a tool, and then sort of potentially cast them aside when the tool is no longer needed. As a wildlife manager, my tendency would be if we are having the desired effect and moose population is increasing, recruitment rates are increasing. Secondarily, if we don't appear to be having a deleterious effect to the black bear population, then no change is needed. So that the change would be at the point at which the black bear population is getting lower than we want it. Then we say, well, we should release some pressure on black bears. Maybe we slow down or stop the spring bear hunt. Um, because we have a good relationship with the bear hunters, I would encourage them to continue the diversionary feeding and have them help us with collaring bears during that period of time because it's an amazingly effective way to collar bears as well. These guys were so
yeah,
great. They were so great to work with. They would get hold of me when they abandoned a bait site. They'd be like, well, we harvested a boar. We only have sows coming in. We're not going to use this bait site any longer. We would immediately get a culvert trap on there, keep the bait site active, and collar those bears. I collared 13 bears in a week, which has got to be some sort of world record for collaring bears using culvert traps. But it was because we had such a good working relationship with these hunters, and we were getting onto these bait sites when they were very, very fresh and actively being used.
yeah. Well, that is cool. One of the aspects of your paper that I really enjoy, like a theme that came out is, I mean, right in the title, it's multi-predator systems. And I think more than not, just about everywhere in North America is a multi-predator system, even if there may be us on the smaller end. But I mean, obviously, you go north of North America, you're talking about black bears, grizzly bears, wolves, mixed together.
Mm-hmm.
We've actually got all of them, lynx, bobcat, cougars, black bears, grizzly bears, wolves, coyotes. Like, yeah, it's a multi-predator system. Now, you get this issue with a moose population or a caribou population. The hunting community, the outdoor community kind of has its go-to. Like they're like, and I've seen this over my lifetime. If it's moose, most hunters will tell you, you got to look at your black bears. They can be very hard on moose calves. Anything else, it'll typically go to wolves. So you've got this multi-predator system. What I got from your paper is like, you don't have to like across the board be managing all these predators, but you need to pick out what your driver is and then focus on that. There may be multi-predator systems where you said it is additive and it is the whole works of them are contributing. Where I want you to comment here on is your ideas about the best management approach to this. Because I've seen some mistakes made. Elk populations declining, calves declining. It's the wolves. There's a lot of wolves, soon more wolves in there. And it's like, okay, give us a little bit of time. We're going to figure it out. The biologists come back and go, guess what, guys? It's your cougars, not your wolves.
Yeah, and that's really the process of science is first of all, do your homework, figure out what the drivers are first, which is why we did 10 years of collaring work before we started any real management action. We want to understand what the drivers were and the order in which the drivers affected the population, right? So for adult moose, in the order of impact was brainworm at 33% of mortality, followed by winter ticks was 20% of mortality. Predation on adult moose was non-existent. We had higher human harvest on moose. Even though it was insignificant, we had higher human harvest on moose than predation on adult moose. And then we did the same exact process where we systematically looked at what was impacting the calf survival rates. It turns out for moose calves, it was equal bears and wolves. And if I had my way, I would have tried to manage both predator species at some level. Certainly not with an intent to decimate them, but an intent to have a desired effect. We just weren't allowed to harvest wolves here because of the Endangered Species Act, which left us with this experiment on a single predator species. Still, if I had my way, to put the throttle down on moose calf recruitment the best, to increase that recruitment rate the best, we probably would be managing both species of predators to some extent. But the other point I really try to make to society more broadly is, first of all, I have no animosity towards any species other than aphids, which affect my hot pepper plants. But I have no animosity towards wolves or bears. I love all the different wildlife species that I work on. So
Curtis hates wasps and bees.
understand. But my point is, there's no intent to decimate these predator species. The intent is to tweak them, right? And so, if you look at, I think of slow gradual processes. So you think of weight gain, an extra 100 calories a day equates to a pound of weight gain in a month period. And you do that over a year, you've gained 12 pounds, which is about where I'm at. With predator control, it's exactly the same thing. You manage predators just a little bit, and over time you have a long-term desired effect. Why? Because predators eat a lot of calories, and those calories are comprised of moose calves or adult moose or adult deer. So managing a small number of whatever prey species can have a pretty significant impact without even really affecting the population of that prey species very, very much. Here's another interesting sort of thing to think about that people like me think about is, a wolf consumes somewhere between 3,500 and 6,000 calories a day, right? It's a 100-pound animal. It's literally consuming at a caloric rate of 2 or 3 times a human because they're 2 or 3 times more active than a human, right? So that's a lot of consumption. That's a lot of caloric consumption. Almost all of those calories are consumed as meat, which is not a super calorie dense food. 200 calories per pound of flesh. A wolf is eating somewhere around 6 to 10 pounds of meat, or meat and guts, all about the same caloric equivalency per day. Just by managing those populations just a little bit, you're having an enormous impact on the rate of consumption. And I think that's something that, maybe not everybody thinks about, but people like me that like to do math and think about these things do. So
Yeah. Yeah. So it's so fascinating. And what I love about what you said, like at the outset, is like you've done this research, you've got a long time of like figuring it out, had a management intervention dialed in, it kind of worked, but you won't be surprised if next year and 2 years from now it just isn't working anymore because something has changed in this system. It's so stochastic that you've always got to be on the top, ready, almost like you got to be ready for your work to be disproven and be ready, nimble, like to be looking for, for the next thing. So,
man, that's a really great way to put it, and not a way that I've sort of worked it through in my mind. What the societal expectation is you implement something and it's supposed to work forever. But like you said, the variables are always changing. A business model for a business may work for a really long time, and some variables may change, and they have to adjust to how they do business. And it's very, very similar. I oftentimes think of myself as an accountant of wildlife, right? I'm doing accounting on wildlife populations, and the variables impacting those wildlife populations change all of the time. And so I have to continue measuring and try different interventions over points in time to see what actually works.
yeah, no, that's a good one. Your wildlife accountant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, Seth, this has been a great conversation. I've learned a lot from you. The whole black bears, I don't think get a lot of the conversation time when it comes to predator prey ecology in North America. It's generally wolves. And then of course, the far north, it's leans more to the brown bears. So this was super cool for us to be focusing on a black bear, which I said before, it's always been part of the hunting circle. If it's moose, hunters will always tell you you need to be looking at your black bears. They're just an inherent thing. They've learned that. So that's why when I came across it, hey, somebody actually researched the question. Then we can either validate or disprove, the hunter paradigm around moose and the impact of black bears. So, man, thanks so much for
I
your
thank you
thoughts
guys.
on
I
this. And
appreciate it. And thank you for the carefully thought questions. I really
mm,
enjoy this type of thinking, and I, I I like the fact that you're willing to entertain the fact that these are nuanced questions, and there's not clear, simple answers. And I really think it's important to convey that to the public as well, and to your constituency.
yeah, and I think what you said that I would like a message to get out as well is this isn't about trying to wipe out a predator species, not trying to wipe out black bears. Or if you were allowed to harvest wolves and the ESA wasn't there, like you would want to dabble a little bit to help the moose out, but not suppress them for a lot of reasons. Tribal values, societal values, your own values as a wildlife lover of wildlife, as well. So that's an important message I would like folks, to take away as well. And I think there are a lot of people in the hunting community that are trying to work that message as well. It's sort of like, no, we're not. No, 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 no. Like that's too extreme. We don't want to wipe them out. Like we know we got the smoke a pack a day and the only good one's a dead one crowd. Just ignore them. And we all like this. We're more along the line of tweaking and
Yes,
intervention, right? Like those are good
that's
words,
that's
not
exactly it.
drastic.
And
So
I think what happens nowadays in particular is we are in a polarized society where one position tends to polarize an opposing position to the point that there's no sort of logical thought. It's everybody's polarized against for or against. And I think we need to change that. I think media needs to change that. I think people need to change their ways of thinking so that they can recognize that things are more nuanced than whatever short-term meme is being sent out by their social media network.
Yeah, and the sad part now is we all use social media a lot to communicate our ideas. The algorithms are actually designed to create the polarization, and so it's may not actually be a real thing of our conversations, but the algorithms are just showing you more of what they know is going to piss you off and get you, because it's sort of like outrage generates more posts and comments, which the algorithm likes. It doesn't care whether it's a good conversation. So I
We're
think
all being manipulated. That's exactly.
yeah, we are. So in the hunting and conservation and wildlife side of things, let's be cognizant of that too, is that we're using a communication tool, which is manipulating this division and polarization. So hopefully maybe that'll change one day. So right on. Thanks a million for this, Seth. This
You
has
bet. Thank you
been
guys.
absolutely
And
fantastic. And Curtis, take it away.
Right on. The Hunter Conservationist podcast is brought to you by J. Martin Taxidermy out of West Kelowna, BC. Maybe this fall you drew a moose tag in BC. We spent a whole podcast talking about moose. Send it to Jesse. I'd like to see a full, like half life size. Somebody do that. If you get a nice bull this year, somebody just go for it and do a full half life size of a moose. That'd be pretty sweet. I'm sure Jesse would appreciate doing that. Or you get a black bear. I've actually always wanted a half life size black bear. I got a rug. I got a nice brown bear when I was a kid, and I got a rug done. And I think I don't have a lot of regrets, but I kind of regret not getting like a half life size. So that'd be cool. So sending some half life sizes Jesse's way. But as always, big shout out, big thank you to Jesse and J. Martin Taxidermy for continuing to support this show. So thank you, Jesse.
Yes, thank you very much. And Dr. Moore, Seth, thank you very much. Please extend our thanks to Chief and Council, to the tribe members for allowing you to, I guess, participate in a conversation which is representing their views, their lands, and information that belongs to them, and shared some kind of cultural and historical things. So our thanks to everybody there as well. So that's important. So thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you in the next episode.